Coming up on Bridge City News, a 24-year-old Lethbridge man has been arrested following a hit and run which left a 37-year-old man in hospital. Thousands are on evacuation alert as wildfires continue to rage in BC's South Okanagan. And Conservatives are still upset over Prime Minister Justin Trudeau suspending Parliament. We will explain why.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A man wanted in connection with a hit and run in Lethbridge was taken into custody last night. Dylan Sokol was arrested by Lethbridge police after barricading himself inside of a home on Lafayette Boulevard. The 24-year-old, who was known to police, was wanted for dangerous driving causing bodily harm. On August 12th, Sokol was involved in a hit-and-run incident resulting in the injury of a 37-year-old man who remains at a Calgary hospital. Sokol was taken into custody just before 8 o'clock last night. Police in Fort Macleod need help finding a man who went missing on July 16th. RCMP are concerned for the well-being of 28-year-old Riley Eaglechild. He's described as Indigenous, 6'1", 170 pounds with black hair and brown eyes. If you've seen Eaglechild, call the Fort Macleod RCMP right away at 403-553-4600. The BC Wildfire Service says as many as 151 fires that have flared up in the province in the past week were caused by lightning. Officials say more than 35 of the fires are still burning out of control. Those include the 14-kilometre wildfire in the South Okanagan that has forced people to leave more than 300 properties south of Penticton. City of Penticton Mayor John Vasilaki spoke with BCN about recovery efforts in his region.
Right now, the worry that we have for today and tomorrow are the winds. They're forecasting that the wind, we're going to have some gusts between 50 and 70 kilometers an hour, which is quite high. And if that happens, especially from the north, the fire and the smoke will be coming towards town again rather than going over the hill. So that's a very big concern that we have at the present time. But we are hoping that nothing like that happens. And what we got from the meteorologists, the guys that tell the weather, we're hoping that they're wrong, like they are sometimes.
The Alberta government is going to spend more than $1 million to upgrade trails on public lands and provincial parks in David Thompson country. Environment and Parks Minister Jason Nixon says much of the improvement will take place between Rocky Mountain House and Nordegg. Nixon says the spending will create jobs, bolster tourism, and help people get out to explore these special areas. He says many provincial parks are seeing an all-time high number of visitors this summer. Tensions are running high in a central Alberta community following the dismissal of the town's longtime fire chief this week. Marty Butts was let go after 10 years as fire chief and 34 years as a volunteer member. Hundreds gathered outside of the Sundry Fire Hall last night to protest. Butts says he was fired by the town because of alleged bullying. Closer to home, the Interfaith Food Bank is celebrating Whoop Up Days with their own Harvest Days party. As Micah Quinn explains, community members are encouraged to bring their own garden vegetables and learn about gardening as they tour the Interfaith Learning Garden.
Tucked behind the Interfaith Food Bank is the Interfaith Learning Garden, which will play host to the Food Bank's Harvest Day celebration.
Everyone can come, donate for a barbecue lunch to support the food bank if you bring any veggies that you've harvested and have extra. And then you can come see our garden space, and we have family-friendly games and activities as well.
COVID guidelines will also be followed.
So we will be monitoring how many people are in and out. We will also have a form making sure that we know who is here in case there is an outbreak in Lethbridge. And then we will also be doing masks required, hand sanitizer, and the activities that we have will be very socially distanced.
The Learning Garden teaches gardening tips as well, and you can hear about it firsthand at the event.
We are a space where you get to learn how to garden, learn how to compost, all other outdoor things to support your own sustainability and food wealth.
Sulin says learning about gardening and growing your own food can be quite beneficial in life.
It's so easy to do once you start, and it's really fulfilling. It's something that brings you food that you can then use yourself. It is this beautiful process watching things grow, and it's just something that's handy for everyone to learn, whether that is growing some flowers in your yard or simply one tomato plant on your windowsill. You don't need a lot of space, you don't need a lot of money. It is something that everyone can practice. practice.
The Interfaith Learning Garden Harvest Day celebration starts August 21st and runs from 1 to 3 p.m. at the Interfaith Food Bank. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The government of Alberta announced that there have been 109 new cases of COVID-19 in the province over the past 24 hours. That brings the total number of active cases to 1,084, including 31 here in the South Zone. Alberta Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, says there's also been one new death. She says we may see an increase of cases as more and more people are being tested, including teachers who are heading back to school.
Overall, more than 855,000 tests have been completed on over 690,000 people. The lab completed more than 9,200 tests in the last 24 hours. I anticipate these increases are likely due in part to teachers and school authority staff who are choosing to be tested. I continue to encourage all teachers and school authority staff to get tested before the start of the school year.
Hinshaw added that close to 11,300 Albertans have also recovered from the novel coronavirus. A province-wide protest in support of increased funding for school re-entry in Alberta will take place at various MLA's constituency offices tomorrow. The one slated for Lethbridge will occur at 11 a.m. in front of Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf's office. Organizers say the peaceful protest is for those who are concerned about Education Minister Adriana Lagrange's school reopening plan. Protesters are asking for a cap on class sizes of 15 students and an immediate rehire of 20,000 educational assistants and support staff. The Alberta Teachers Association, meanwhile, says the province should delay the start of the school year. The association says the government's current back-to-school plan does not allow for proper social distancing in larger classes containing more than 30 kids. Association President Jason Schilling says crowded schools should split some classes to allow for increased spacing. The association also requested additional funding to put substitute teachers on contract and to add support staff and cleaning supplies. Education Minister Adriana Lagrange says the province's plan has been approved by health officials, including Dr. Dina Hinshaw. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says for the teachers, it really is all about the physical distancing during this pandemic.
Now, back when I was in elementary school, everyone had their own individual little desk, but teachers are saying that no, well, now we actually have tables that are shared by 2 or 4 kids. And you've got, say, 30 kids in a classroom, not, say, 15 or something. So they've got some real concerns about whether or not children and, not even just children, but youths are going to be able to actually maintain sort of this required, 6 feet of physical distancing.
Mr. Dawson will also discuss how the current school curriculum in Alberta is a hot-button topic right now. That interview is coming up in the second half of our show. Meanwhile, in Manitoba, Premier Brian Pallister says masks, which have been only a recommendation, will now be mandatory for kids in grades 4 through 12 going back to school when physical distancing cannot be maintained.
Mask usage has already been strongly recommended. In our family, when the doctor made those recommendations, they were always followed, but we want to be clear that when these doctors' recommendations are implemented in our school system, they will be followed. And so we take that step today. What we've heard from administrators, school leaders, parents, teachers as well, is that it would be even more straightforward to simply say it's required.
The Trudeau government is rolling out a $37 billion income support plan for workers whose earnings have crashed during the pandemic. Around 4 million workers will receive the $500 a week Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was set to wind down next month. CERB will be extended for another 4 weeks, and a new benefit that pays $400 a week for up to 26 weeks will replace it for those ineligible for employment insurance.
Canadians have confidence in this program. It's been a lifeline for many people and has been monumental in our country's efforts to slow the spread of the virus, keeping Canadians safe and supporting our economy. To provide certainty and continuity, we are announcing today that Canadians will have access to an additional 4 weeks of CERB for a total of 28 weeks.
Conservative MPs will not commit to voting down the Liberal government next month. Pierre Poilievre and Michael Barrett say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wanted Parliament suspended to end committee probes of his involvement in the multi-million-dollar contract to We Charity to run a student grant program.
Another email from Craig Kielburger that went to someone in the government the same day he spoke to Bill Morneau on the phone, but we don't know who received the email, that's blacked out, or what the email said, all blacked out. Here's an email from the minister responsible for the department that granted the $500 million to her top bureaucrat, Again, all the substance is blacked out. And that would not be the first time. Next page, blacked out. This page, blacked out. This page, blacked out. This page, blacked out. Why don't we ask what's in those pages at a parliamentary committee? Well, I'll tell you why. Justin Trudeau shut down those parliamentary committees. When did he do it? The same day these documents became public.
Fire crews were battling wildfires in San Francisco Bay Area, and thousands of people are under orders to evacuate as dozens of wildfires across California continue to burn amid a blistering heat wave now into its second week.
We're up in the hills. We just finished helping put out the fires at my two neighbors' place in the back. So this is my big concern. There's too much weeds growing on this property here. We're worried about the eucalyptus trees are going to catch fire and then we have a disaster.
Churches all over the world are finding creative ways to maintain physical distancing while continuing to hold regular worship services. Despite many difficulties, a church in Mexico is able to minister to their congregation in their cars. As we see and hear in this next report, the vehicles were parked at least 6 feet from each other and used their horns to worship the Lord.
In the Mexican city of Querétaro, the Ministries of Reconciliation Church organized a worship service with a special feature. None of the attendees got out of their cars. As lead pastor Abel Sanchez explained, the idea came from the congregation's need to meet in person after more than 4 months of separation due to coronavirus restrictions.
There was a powerful joy in the spirit that you could see in all the people. The people were happy because they were coming back together as a church after 4 months, and no one was missing. No one from the church has died from this disease. We give glory to God for that.
To hold the mega auto service, as it was called, they faced several obstacles. Although the health department gave permission for the event, the municipal authorities opposed it, and the weather threatened to rain on the gathering. But thanks to several miracles, the worship service finally did take place.
Not only was there not a single drop of rain, but God held back the rain all day. And when the sun appeared on the horizon as it was setting, the clouds that had been so dark turned into a cloud of fire, and it reminded me of what happened to the people of Israel.
Over 1,000 vehicles arrived for the meeting, but due to limited capacity, only the first 400 were allowed in. Sanchez says that the presence of the Lord fell on the place, blessing all who came. The pastor explained that they hope to expand the parking area to hold more cars and to have another similar service in a few weeks. Javier Bolaños for the Global News Alliance.
Here's a cute little story. Penguin chicks at Chicago's Shed Aquarium have reached a new milestone. They recently jumped into the water for their first official swim. This flightless seabird can be found on both the Atlantic and Pacific sides of the continent, while many are mainly found in Argentina, Chile, the Falkland Islands, and now in Chicago. The Magellanic penguin is one of 18 penguin species. They are so cute. It was nice to see that the heat warning finally ended for much of southwestern Alberta. There's even a slight chance of some rain tonight. Complete weather details are coming up. Jeanette Roche is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, the heat warning from Environment Canada finally ended, and we could potentially see some much-needed rain?
Yeah, that's right. We could actually see a 30% chance of showers this evening and a risk of a thunderstorm. Overnight low tonight, 11 degrees. We could see a wind at 30 kilometers per hour, at times gusting to 50. But once we get up tomorrow, we're going to see that sun shine again. No rain expected in the forecast tomorrow. Just a high of 29. Could feel warmer with that humidex though. And then for Sunday, or for Friday rather, Friday evening, overnight low 12 degrees. As we look further into the weekend, it's hard to believe that it's almost here already. Lots of sunshine expected for both Saturday and Sunday. 27 is our high for Saturday, 25 for Sunday. And then we're going to climb a bit back to 27 for Monday and Tuesday with a mix of sun and cloud and partly cloudy skies as well for Wednesday as we get into that 25-degree mark for next Wednesday, which is right around our average for this time of year. As you can see, Almanac tells us 25 is the average temperature that we're looking at for this time of year. Average low 10 degrees. Our high temperature on this day was here back in 1939. 33 degrees was the high, and the low temperature was back in 1986. It was 1 degree. The sun rose this morning at 6:30 a.m. and the sun set this evening for Thursday night. We can expect that at 8:39 p.m. right on the dot there. So let's take a look at what's happening across the country weather-wise. We're going to be seeing a lot of showers in certain areas, including British Columbia tomorrow. So both Victoria and Vancouver expecting showers and possible thunderstorms. Victoria's high 20, 21 in Vancouver. Edmonton and Calgary both sitting at 25 tomorrow under sunny skies. However, tonight, Calgary is under a severe thunderstorm watch, so they could get a 60% chance of showers tonight. Edmonton, same thing, but by tomorrow it's going to be sunny and hazy. And then as we get into the rest of the prairies here, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, heat warnings in effect, and all three of those cities, Saskatchewan, Regina, Winnipeg, expecting thunderstorms tomorrow, as well as Toronto and Ottawa. So it's a very rainy country tomorrow. It just seems like Alberta is sitting in that little sun belt there. But Toronto is expecting thunderstorms, Ottawa, Montreal, and same thing with Fredericton here. High of 20 degrees, expecting thunderstorms tomorrow. Possibility of some showers in Charlottetown tomorrow with a high of 20 degrees. But Halifax and St. John's, Newfoundland, sitting in lots of sunshine tomorrow. 24, the high for Halifax, and 23 is our high temperature for St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow. There you go. That is your weather forecast.
An outbreak of COVID-19 at a Cargill meat processing plant in Calgary that was reported last week appears to be under control. 5 cases of the novel coronavirus were found at Case Ready Meats and as of yesterday remain steady with the 3 workers already recovered. Cargill says its plant is running at full capacity. Maple Leaf Foods says it has temporarily suspended pork exports to China after a few dozen workers at its Brandon, Manitoba plant tested positive for the novel coronavirus. Maple Leaf says rigorous safety measures are in place and the plant continues to operate. The company says it voluntarily made the move after the Chinese government adopted new protocols that require Canadian processors to report positive COVID-19 cases. Company officials are confident that they can provide customers with safe food, but it respects China's new import protocols. It looks like there will be one less pasta sauce on the shelf to choose from. Ragu says it will no longer be selling its products in Canada. It is unclear whether the COVID-19 pandemic had anything to do with the company pulling out of the Canadian market. On its website, company officials said, "We recognize that finding our product may be a challenge right now and are working hard to keep up with demand to restock your favorite products." The company, Mizcan America Inc., began in the 1930s in Rochester, New York, and opened its first factory in 1946. The Canada Energy Regulator is forecasting a 6.6% drop in Canadian oil production this year. That would make for an average of 4.38 million barrels a day. The average production in Canada last year was 4.6 million. That was up from 4.58 million in 2018. The federal regulator says it expects oil production to recover this fall and winter after producers halted what analysts estimate was as much as 1 million barrels per day due to low prices during the COVID-19 pandemic. When it comes to talking of eliminating fossil fuels altogether, it's a dangerous discussion. That's according to Calvin Beisner of the Cornwall Alliance. He says there's a major cost involved with going with just green technology.
By pushing fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we're going to do 2 things. One, we're going to raise the cost of energy because the fossil fuels are the cheapest source aside from nuclear and hydro. They're much cheaper than wind and solar when you count everything into the price. But 2, we're also going to make that energy less reliable. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. And because of that, you don't have a steady input of energy into the electric grid. That means you have an unstable grid. The more unstable it is, the more you're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and those things kill.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Beisner and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after Business News. There is a large online petition circulating to remove a film from Netflix. The company is being accused of sexualizing children with a promotion of the upcoming French film called Cuties. It focuses on an 11-year-old girl who joins a twerking dance troupe. A trailer for the film, which is scheduled to be released on Netflix Canada on September 9th, shows the girls wearing crop tops and other revealing clothing while dancing provocatively. The petition on change.org has gathered over 50,000 signatures so far. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 29 points on the day to finish at 16,606. The Dow was up 46 points to 27,739. The S&P 500 was up 10 points to 3385, and the Nasdaq was up 118 points to finish at 11,264. Oil was down 35 cents to 42.58 per barrel. Natural gas was down 8 cents to 2.35. Gold was up 18.13 to 19.47.11 an ounce, and silver was up 54 cents to 27.24 an ounce. Wheat is at $213 per metric ton, barley's at $206, canola's at $4.84, and corn is at $232 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.05 to $109.78. Feeder cattle were down 18 cents to $145.83, and lean hogs were up $2.63 to $55.18. The Canadian dollar was up 0.0022 today to 75.87 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a province-wide protest in support of increasing funding for school reentry in Alberta will take place at various MLA's constituency offices tomorrow. The one slated for Lethbridge will occur at 11 a.m. in front of Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf's office. Organizers say the peaceful protest is for those who are concerned about Education Minister Adriana LaGrange's school reopening plan. When it comes to moving forward with the Canadian economy, there are some who believe that we should be going green with our energy sector, especially in Alberta. Calvin Beisner shares with BCN's Jeanette Rocher why that is dangerous thinking. He will explain why after the break.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Get out and explore nature. The Helen Schuler Nature Center is offering guided 1-hour field trips for all ages. Visit lethbridge.ca/things to do, click on Nature Center, and follow the events page where you'll find a list of featured tours that will introduce you to amazing plants and animals found right here in Lethbridge. Cost is $25. Book online for your tour today. The Gallery at Casa is open with the Summer Salon, an unjuried and thematically neutral exhibition taking place until Friday, August 21st. This show is a celebration of the local arts community and their works which have been created during this time of social isolation. Guests can come and enjoy the exhibit by appointment only from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. To book a time, call 403-327-2272. Come and enjoy an afternoon of Japanese culture at the Nikayuko Japanese Garden as they welcome Hibikiya, Lethbridge's own taiko drumming group, for another exciting performance on Sunday, August 30th at 1 p.m. Price of the performance is included with admission. For details, visit nikayuko.com. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The environment has made many worldwide headlines. Joining me now to discuss the issue is Dr. Calvin Beisner, national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance, a group made up of natural scientists, economists, and theologians. Dr. Beisner, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be on the program with you.
All right, and I should have mentioned to you, you're joining us from Memphis, Tennessee, correct?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Now, since this is right up your alley, why don't you tell us, in your opinion, what makes a true environmentalist?
Well, I think a true environmentalist is simply somebody who thinks, I want to make my life the kind of life that leaves the earth a better place than when I entered it. We put it this way, that as Christians involved in this, we take very seriously the instruction from God to human beings in Genesis 1:28, that we are supposed to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over it, or rule it. But we don't want that ruling, that dominion, to be abusive, to be exploitative. Rather, we want it to reflect the way that God rules his creation. And what we see in the earlier verses of Genesis 1 is that God makes everything out of nothing. He brings light out of darkness, order out of chaos, life out of non-life, great variety of life. He instructs all the different forms of life to be fruitful and highly fecund. This is the kind of thing that we should be doing ourselves. So we describe this godly sort of dominion as men and women created in God's image, working together to enhance the fruitfulness and the beauty and the safety of the earth. to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors.
Now, you have written a book called Creation Stewardship, Evaluating Competing Views, in which you mention in that book that it's dangerous to put people or celebrities on a pedestal, such as someone like Greta Thunberg. So why do you say that?
Well, frankly, we need to actually know a lot about what it is we talk about when we pretend to give other people advice. And too often, celebrities, whether it be someone as young as Greta Thunberg, who began speaking out on these things at age 16, or Hollywood celebrities, many of them really, frankly, have never learned in great depth about these issues. I've been studying these issues since the mid-1980s, so it's 35 years in this, and even so, there are parts of this where I would not seek to speak out as an expert. I realize the limits of my own knowledge. So what we need to do is to go to people who really have true expertise on these things. That's why I put together the Cornwall Alliance the way we did. We have just under 70 scholars in our network. About a third are natural scientists, including some of the world's top climate scientists. About a third are economists and policy wonks, and about a third are theologians and philosophers. So we try to bring all of those different insights together to address highly complex problems. And if we don't bring the different disciplinary backgrounds together, we're likely to have rather narrow, superficial approaches to solving very difficult problems.
Mm-hmm. Now, you wrote an interesting piece on your blog with the headline, Global Average Temperature Plummets, Tropical Temperature Fall, third biggest on record. Were you trying to make a point there?
The point is not that that proves that global warming isn't real. No, it doesn't prove any such thing. The point instead is that what we get in the climate debates is that the advocates of the notion of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming that is catastrophic, will point to every heat wave, every temporary uptick in temperature as evidence that global warming is not only real, but is potentially catastrophic, that it is overwhelmingly man-made, things of that sort. But they won't do the same with downticks in temperature. And so I'm just simply pointing out an inconsistency. If that brief downturn in global average temperature about 2 years ago was not evidence against, then a brief upturn is not evidence for. What we need to be doing is looking at very long-term data and looking for real trends rather than anomalies in the trends. And the long-term data do show us that the Earth's average surface atmospheric temperature has risen by roughly 1 degree Celsius since about the middle of the 19th century. And I think that human emissions of carbon dioxide have contributed to that, but the notion that it's catastrophic, the notion that it is overwhelmingly human, man-made, those notions, I think, are not well established in the actual evidence.
Okay, so we need to be careful not to fall into misleading information, basically, is what you're saying, whether it comes to social media or headlines. So how can the average viewer know what headline to trust?
Well, the self-serving answer for me would be to say, come to cornwallalliance.org, cornwallalliance.org. But, really, the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test all things, hold fast what is good. So this is why when we post things on the Cornwall Alliance's website, we make sure that we have links to sources of outstanding scholarly work so that people are able to check the figures for themselves, check the data. That's part of what we're supposed to do as Christians. And that's really the heart of what it is to be scientific. The Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman said that the key to science is that when we have a hypothesis, a guess as to how something works in nature, we set up experiments to see whether what would happen if our guess were right really does happen. And if the observations that come from the experiment, whether in the laboratory or out in the real world, if the observations contradict the prediction, then our guess, our hypothesis, even our theory is wrong. And it doesn't matter how smart we are or how beautiful our guess was or anything else. If observation contradicts theory, then the theory is wrong, and we have to go back to the drawing board. And that's what we get essentially in terms of the claims of very rapid, potentially catastrophic global warming. Those claims are all based not on empirical observations, but on computer models of how the atmosphere responds to added CO2. And the models, on average, predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually observed over the relevant period. That means the models are wrong, and they really need correcting.
Well, so you mentioned CO2, and we were talking about headlines. So headlines tell us that CO2 emissions from fossil fuels is the main cause of global warming. But you disagree with this claim, right?
Well, I think it's actually theoretically possible that that's true. What I think is that the best empirical evidence indicates that it's probably not true. Notice I said probably. I think in many, many different scientific things, we're quite mistaken to speak with total confidence and assurance. I would be wrong to say, well, it's a settled matter that CO2 from fossil fuels is not the primary cause of warming. I also think it's wrong to say, well, the science is settled. CO2 is the primary cause from burning fossil fuels. Here's why I say what I do. It's precisely because the computer models of global climate predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually has been observed in response to the added CO2 in the atmosphere, that we know, therefore, that the models are wrong, that they are over-predicting the amount of influence that CO2 has on global average temperature. When we look back through the history of global temperatures, we see that there have been very similar periods of warming in the past, such as the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period. We've also seen cooling periods in the past, and the interesting thing is that although there is a correlation between temperature and CO2 content in the atmosphere, the correlation is the opposite of what you would think it would be if CO2 were the control knob for temperature. That is, temperature changes first, CO2 changes later. And the reason for that is that as the ocean warms, it outgasses CO2. Ocean water contains CO2. The warmer it is, the less CO2 it keeps in mixture. The colder it is, the more CO2 it holds. So as the temperature changes first, the CO2 follows.
Wow, you are very much a scientist, I could tell. Now, I don't know how it is in the US. I know that our federal government here, and you're probably aware of this, but our federal government here is requiring that all provinces put a carbon tax into place. Do you think that this will produce any positive results?
No, I think it will not produce positive results. And the fundamental reason is this, that a carbon tax assumes that adding carbon dioxide, and by the way, it's very deceptive to speak of it as a carbon tax because carbon is an element, and in its solid form, it's a black, nasty dust, and it can be a problem. Okay, carbon dioxide is not carbon; it is carbon plus 2 atoms of oxygen. It's an odorless, colorless gas that is non-toxic at concentrations 20 times what they are in our present atmosphere. And it is absolutely essential to life. Plants need it for photosynthesis. And the more of it there is, the better plants grow. So treating carbon dioxide as a pollutant is actually, I think, quite the opposite of what it really is. The more CO2 there is in the air, the better plants grow, and that means there's more food for everything that eats plants or eats something else that does eat plants. So the result is a huge increase in crop yields around the world. This has been studied in literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing that we have seen an increase in crop yields measured in terms of about $3.2 trillion of extra food from 1960 to 2012, and we can expect about another $9.8 trillion worth of food just because we've added CO2 to the atmosphere from 2012 to 2050. So you don't tax something that you want more of. You reward it instead. So no, a carbon tax would not be a good idea.
Oh, wow. Now, Dr. Weissner, you believe that the current global response to climate change actually could have some implications, especially for the poor, right?
I do. And that's simply because everything that we produce, we do it using energy. It takes energy to grow food, to process food, to transport food, to make clothing, to make shelter, to have communication. We're using energy right now in this Skype call. It takes vast amounts of energy to lift and keep whole societies out of poverty. Now, the less expensive energy is, the more of it people can use. And in fact, historically, it has been access to abundant, affordable energy, primarily through fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, and natural gas, that has lifted and kept whole societies out of poverty. If we're going to fight allegedly catastrophic, allegedly overwhelmingly man-made global warming by pushing fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to raise the cost of energy because the fossil fuels are the cheapest source aside from nuclear and hydro. They're much cheaper than wind and solar when you count everything into the price. But two, we're also going to make that energy less reliable. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. And because of that, you don't have a steady input of energy into the electric grid. That means you have an unstable grid. The more unstable it is, the more you're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and those things kill.
Now, a lot of Western nations are phasing out coal. How much of a problem is coal to the environment?
Well, if you burn coal in a really sloppy way, coal burning can be a very big problem to the environment. But in all developed countries, we have adopted ways of burning coal to generate electricity that are extremely clean. And essentially, the only thing that comes out of the misnamed smokestacks of coal-fired generating plants in developed countries is water vapor. It's just simply steam from the turbines and the cooling towers. Nothing else comes out. So coal can be badly used, and sometimes it is in very poor countries. And yet the interesting thing that happens, and we see this through the history of our environments and of our economies as well, is that even while air pollution rises in the early stages of economic development, as countries begin to use coal and can't yet afford the very, very highly efficient ways of using it, even while the air pollution rises, life expectancy rises too. And what that means is that the benefits of all of the economic development, driven in part by the use of coal, outweigh the risks. And then as people get wealthy enough, they can afford to adopt the cleaner technologies of using coal, and then you get rid of the pollution, and at the same time you have the benefits of that economic development.
Dr. Weissner, we're out of time, but thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thank you very much, and your listeners can learn more at cornwallalliance.org.
Parents and kids are getting ready for the back to school in our province. Now, the head of the Alberta Teachers Association was to meet with Education Minister Adriana LaGrange to express some concerns. To talk about those concerns in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me once again from Edmonton. Tyler, some of those concerns are about class sizes and how are kids supposed to really social distance, right?
Yeah, that's sort of the gist of it. Governments all over Canada really have been scrambling to sort of figure out how they're going to make this whole thing work. And the teachers have some concerns that are specific. And basically, it does come down to social distancing. Now, back when I was in elementary school, everyone had their own individual little desk. But, teachers are saying that, no, well, now we actually have tables that are shared by 2 or 4 kids. And you've got, say, 30 kids in a classroom, not, say, 15 or something. So they've got some real concerns about whether or not children and, not even just children, but youths are going to be able to actually maintain sort of this required, 6 feet of physical distancing.
How's that going to actually happen with kids? Like when I was in elementary school, I'm hanging out with my buddies, we're wrestling all the time. I mean, that's kind of hard to do for smaller children.
Oh, exactly. And, I believe the provinces put in sort of provincial guidelines about wearing masks in public parts of the schools for kids of a certain age. But I mean, there's no way you're going to keep a bunch of kindergartners apart, or obviously they're not going to be wearing masks. But on the mask front, some school boards have actually decided to go a step further. So as it stands now, say in the cafeteria or the hallways, older students will have to have masks on. Edmonton Public, for example, went ahead and students are going to have to wear them in classrooms as well. Sort of going back to that physical distancing thing. If you can't stay, the recommended distance apart at your desk, you're probably going to have to wear a mask. So handful of educational issues and also some political stuff going on here too.
Yeah, some school boards, including Calgary, have even hired more custodians. Will that really help?
Well, one hopes, I guess. I mean, if you're going to be sanitizing lockers and railings and things like that, hopefully it should make a difference. I don't have children, and it's been a long time since I've been in school. But when I was around, you had not communal bathrooms, but large bathrooms with stalls and things, and every kid was going in and out of those. And you had locker rooms and gym equipment. So I imagine it's going to look, quite a bit different. And, that's before we even talk about some of the other demands, which are like upgrading ventilation in schools and things like that.
I remember too, in elementary school and even junior high, we'd share sandwiches and share drinks. I mean, whatever, right? It's my buddies. We're going to hang out together in the cafeteria. Now, what's interesting, Tyler, is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has not yet decided if his kids are going to go back to school.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. He was asked this on Tuesday, I think it would have been, when everyone was talking about the prorogation thing. And a reporter said, "Have you decided yet?" And he said, "Well, no, Sophie and I have been talking about it like every other parent in the country, and we just haven't really decided yet." Now, he also sort of went on to say that this is, a provincial responsibility, but the federal government will help out where it can. So there's that side of it too. And, you could do the headline that's blaring sort of Trudeau isn't sending his kids back to school or something. But, I thought it was actually quite a candid answer from a prime minister who has, not been the world's most candid guy in the last couple months, saying that I think it just speaks to how difficult that decision is for parents if the prime minister has to come out and say that they're still discussing it.
Now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're talking about more custodians, maybe more teachers, substitute teachers, more help in the school board system. Now, the NDP is actually seizing the moment to demand spending increases and rollbacks to previous belt tightening. But the province is saying, you know what, the UCP, listen, we got to get this debt and deficit under control here.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting sort of thing to watch unfold because, whatever the legitimacy of those demands might be, that, more teachers' aides, more teachers would allow for smaller class sizes, what have you. A lot of these demands are the sort of same demands that the NDP has been making for the past, ever, I suppose, probably, but certainly since the campaign trail, certainly since the budgets have come out. I think one could question the motives a little bit if you wanted to. It's an interesting thing where you have the sort of the on the ground decisions that the government has made that are going to affect teachers and students and things like that. And you have the NDP that's sort of saying similar things to the teachers associations. But it's also the same sort of politics that they've been playing for a long time. So, I don't know what that means sort of writ large, but it's quite interesting to watch it sort of unfold, you'd think in some ways maybe that the arguments would change or something, but it's almost more the same.
Now, it appears as though curriculum review has been a hot button topic. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the Kenney government, the UCP government, has decided to do a review of the social studies curriculum. The sort of general gist of that being to get what they see as political bias out of the education system. Now, where there has been controversy is in the appointment of a review panel that's going to look at the curriculum and make some suggestions. Now, the first criticism that's been leveled at it is it's all men. I believe it's eight people on the panel, maybe six, and they're all men. So that's received some criticism, certainly. But a main guy, Chris Champion, has been sort of singled out because he's been writing in a publication called the Dorchester Review, and he's written about Indigenous people and things like that, Indigenous education, and some of the things that have come through schools to sort of try and raise awareness of Canada's past and things like that. So he has been quite critical of that in a way that I think is probably fair to say is a bit out of step with where most of academia is and most of where the education establishment is at. So that has been a controversy, and it's also bled into this other controversy that viewers might remember from maybe earlier in the summer, maybe spring. It's hard to keep track when every day is a Sunday. But Paul Bunner, who is the Premier's speechwriter, found himself under fire because the NDP dug up columns that he'd written for Alberta Report magazine, which some viewers may remember from the 80s and 90s, a very right-leaning publication, news magazine. And so he had written, again, things that are quite out of step with the current sort of environment of reconciliation. So there has been this narrative ongoing in the last couple of weeks that the Kenney government is disinterested in reconciliation, that there's going to be a very Eurocentric interpretation of social studies and Canadian history. And, there's been, it hasn't just been the NDP, it hasn't just been sort of left-wing critics, an association that represents 60s scoop survivors from the residential schools era has come out and condemned this. So it's morphed into a bit more. There was always going to be a controversy about curriculum review. I think there always is. There was during the math thing, but it's I think blown up a little more maybe than everyone would have anticipated, and it seems to me quite touchy right now.
Now, you didn't grow up with Discovery Math, did you?
Well, I can't do math, so I might as well have. But no, I recall multiplication tables and things. I couldn't do them now, I don't think. Maybe if I did Discovery Math, I'd know it.
Oh, you get a headache and it's a nightmare. Don't even try it. Now, Premier Jason Kenney made a stop in Lacombe last week to discuss rural internet issues. I know a lot of farmers and ranchers have had a lot of issues with that. Now, the good news is that Shaw has apparently upgraded to offer proper internet to all of its customers.
Yeah, that's right. So they said they've spent tens of millions of dollars upgrading their infrastructure and can now offer sort of city speed internet, I guess maybe would be the way to phrase it, to rural customers. Now, this obviously, as you mentioned, has been an issue all over rural Alberta, is an issue actually all over rural Canada, to the extent that the federal government actually has a whole sort of program devoted to trying to figure out the internet thing. It just struck me now that the timing on that's actually rather fortuitous because, if kids are going to be doing some sort of remote learning, in the fall, certainly you're not going to be wanting to be on slower dial-up internet trying to log into your Zoom class or whatever. So, changes afoot a little bit. And the other thing, that links into is the economic recovery. Difficult to do business online, difficult to manage your website or something, or deal with customer feedback, all those sorts of things that a small business might have to do if you have inferior internet. So Kenney had sort of talked about that too. Part of the Alberta's recovery is going to need to be, better internet infrastructure to rural Albertans.
Tyler, hospital fees are back. Now, the province is attempting to return to normal during the pandemic and have implemented parking fees once again. Some are kind of considering the timing, it's not really good, and many people are not happy about it.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, it always comes up when they build new hospitals, when they're talking about transit routes. The parking fee thing is, I think something that a lot of people maybe don't think about until suddenly they're at the hospital or someone is in care at the hospital for an extended period of time. But yeah, the AHS has reintroduced parking fees. I believe the hospital in Lethbridge is one of those that will see its fees come back. The Edmonton hospitals, the government is saying this is, we're trying to return to normal here. This is something that's got to happen, but no doubt I think everything a government is going to do, whether that's the Alberta government, the BC government, whatever, anytime they try and change some of these things back to normal, I think people are going to be unhappy, justifiably or not. I think I'd be cranky if I was going to visit a loved one in hospital for sure. But it's also one of those things, I think, that it's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point. So maybe they're figuring, let's do it now, take the lumps for it now, and move on.
Now, Tyler, Jason Kenney has spoken repeatedly about private health clinics doing surgeries to alleviate some of the long wait lists for Albertans. Now, this is something the opposition is not really happy about. In fact, Notley and crew blasted Kenney on private hospital in Edmonton offering non-emergency for orthopedic surgery.
Yeah, that's right. So there are plans in the works for this huge new private facility. Now, it's not a private facility in the sense that you might see in the United States. You don't walk in and, hand over your visa and then they're going to set your bone or whatever. It's still going to be government covered, but it's a private facility. So yeah, there's sort of a big controversy broiling involving the lobbying behind the scenes to make this happen and all that sort of backroom kind of stuff that makes for kind of interesting reading and interesting journalism. But this is the NDP has long figured they have a winner in terms of talking about the privatization of healthcare and the fear that healthcare in Alberta is going to be privatized. They said this numerous times on the campaign trail. They really harped really, really hard on it on the campaign trail because they said their internal polling showed it was an issue that really resonated with Albertans. So now, of course, when we have an actual policy issue in front of us, the NDP is going, whole hog on this. Lots of tweets, lots of videos, lots of condemnation, everything, just sort of a full broadside against Tyler Shandro, the health minister, and the UCP government. So it's, again, an interesting thing because we're going right back to these political strategies that we had months ago, years ago, and are now sort of coming to the fore again. So whether a private hospital for surgery is a good idea or not, there's going to be a lot of yelling and shouting, I think, in the legislature and on Twitter about this for certainly the foreseeable future.
And I've noticed that things are getting quite nasty on Twitter between the Conservatives and the NDP, the UCP and the NDP.
Yeah, maybe it's because they don't have an outlet, another outlet or something, and everyone's just sitting at home being cranky about it. But yeah, it's been really vitriolic online. That's not quite the right word. It's been very dramatic online, lots of back and forths. Government spokespeople and issues managers and things like that are sort of, it's all unfolding in real time, like 20 years ago this would happen. You'd have dueling press conferences or something and guys would be on the talk shows. But now you open Twitter and you can see people going back and forth fighting over all these things. And it seems really acrimonious to me. And this has not been the most friendly time.
Tyler, the Fair Deal panel came 43% under budget. It's when the government officials held town hall meetings across the province asking how Alberta can have a stronger voice. And I guess there were around 25 recommendations being considered right now that the province is analyzing. What were some of those recommendations?
Yeah, so this was the big panel on, it goes way back to sort of some of the firewall letter stuff. So this is where we got the ideas about the Alberta pension plan and Alberta police force, negotiating some sort of new equalization deal or sort of retroactive payments for equalization. But yeah, I mean, it's a tiny little news nugget, but it's not something we've heard about a lot recently. And it's mainly just interesting that has a government panel ever come in under budget? It's one of those things that you just almost always expect a cost overrun on. So it's a minuscule amount of money in the scheme of things. I think it was $300,000 or something like that. So it's not like we're talking, big chunks of government money here. But hey, someone found some savings this spring.
Yeah, the UCP give themselves a little pat on the back, I guess, even though there's only like $375K. Now, Tyler, the Western Standard is reporting that longtime Conservative MLA, who then sat as an independent, I believe, Lloyd Snellgrove, is now supporting the Wildrose Independence Party.
Yeah, that's right. So former cabinet minister from the Stelmach years, I think, if I have my history right there, gave an interview to the Western Standard saying that he's sort of seeing the time for independence to be a thing. Again, another thing that I feel like we haven't heard that much about recently. Midst of the pandemic, everyone's attention is sort of drifted away from Fair Deal panel, the anti-energy inquiry, and separatism. So, it's just maybe a little wind in their sails. There's been a couple other prominent people who've supported that sort of thing relatively recently. Jay Hill, I think, the former Reform Party MP. So, it may be a bit of good news for the independence folks, but Kenny is still. I know I said on the show like all last year that I thought this was going to be something that Kenny was going to have to deal with and was going to have to figure out a way to diffuse, because facing attacks from sort of his right puts him in a difficult position. This might be one of those things that the pandemic has maybe made go away for the interim, but one should never make predictions. You always end up looking like a fool at the end of the day.
That's very true. We'll see how it all unfolds. Alberta correspondent for the National Post and our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, thanks again for your time today.
My pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.